Hey, what it do? What it do? Peace and favor to the bruise scattered to the four corners. Hey, came across some information, doing a little studying. Seemed like everybody's kind of in that mode to some degree, but I came across something that's very fascinating. This is out of, and I don't know how clear this is when you kind of record off your phone, but this is out of Department of Economics, Kobe College, Waterville, Maine. The Uncommon Market Essays in the Economic History of the Atlantic Slave Trade. I thought this was very interesting. I only read about 20 pages so far. Then I decided to video it a little bit of it because I kind of got lost in reading it. I'm going to try to blow through it pretty quickly. Maybe take about 10 to 15, 20 minutes. But they had numbers. And a lot of people like to give a lot of opinions on did it really happen, did it not? They had numbers, so let's hit it really quick. Late 18th and early 19th century, slave traders in Angola faced significant restrictions on their ability to invest elsewhere than in local slavery. Royal decrees and Brazilian merchants hindered the movement of funds out of Angola. Now, I didn't even read this page. But let's continue on this one. What else stop at? Brazilian merchants hindered the movement of funds out of Angola, retarded the development of an autonomous Angolan merchant marine, and kept merchant capital from flowing into agriculture or other enterprises not directly related to slavery. Merchants who built up wealth at Luanda seem first to have invested in consumer imports, then have expanded their slaving operations within Angola, and only belatedly to have found ways to purchase ships or begin selling in Brazil on their own account. Short-term inelasticities, I don't know, that word kind of weird, in the supply of slaves in highly competitive environment of Luanda, slaves limited the amount of funds that could usefully be applied to expanding slavery, since the common resorts were only inflation and risky loans of trade goods to bush traders. The persistent complaints of Angolan merchants during the decades before 1800s or so were symptoms of an economic structure that was also retarding diversification of the Angolan economy. Beyond its narrow concentration on the export of African labor. The expanding slave trade also braked economic diversification by reducing local labor supplies until government military expeditions lacked logistical support, and local agriculture failed to feed the city of Luanda. These constraints, however, were not absolute. After the opening of Brazilian ports to foreign commerce, the merchants of Angola showed increasing signs of financial independence that they eventually have supported economic reform that followed the end of slavery in the 19th century. This is where I really wanted to start. Let's go. Between 1727 and 1890, scores, probably hundreds of Europeans were invited to make the 90-mile journey by hammock from Ouidah. Now, we know that word. Let's say Juda. From Juda to Bumi, where they witnessed the annual custom of the king of Dahomey. There they were treated to several days of parades and spectacles involving considerable human sacrifice. Wow, how did I miss that? Let's go over that again. There they were treated to several days of parades and spectacles involving considerable human sacrifice, great displays of wealth, and the adulation of the king by all his subjects. Meanwhile, throughout the 18th century, directors of English, French, and Portuguese forts sat on the port of Ouidah, Juda, attempted to increase flow of slaves to the nation's colonies, and took part in intrigues involving each other and a variety of factions in the state of the region. All 18th century observers recognized the Dahomey to be part of a larger grouping, a larger grouping known variously as Costa de Mina, Bight of Benin, or Slave Coast, extending from Kida to beyond Lagos. And this is 107. They remain nevertheless fascinated with the kingdom of Dahomey and transfixed by their experience at the annual customs and in the forts at Ouidah or at Juda. According to 18th century writers, developed two main aspects to the interpretation of Dahomey: a fascination with the power of the king, and an emphasis on slave trade as the key factor in Dahomeyan political history. These two themes have remained dominant in the interpretation of 18th century and 19th century Dahomey to this day. Let me see if I want to go. I want to skip. I want to skip past this, and I want to go. I want to skip past this. I want to let's hit this middle piece right in the middle, y'all. One aspect of the review of Bight of Benin history will be to study the slave trade, to confront questions of its surname, to confront questions of its nature, its magnitude, and its role in politics and society. Responses to these questions will be of interest to students of slavery and slave trade, not only because the famous image of Dahomey, but check this out, y'all, but also because of some 1.9 million slaves from the Bight of Benin appear to have landed in the New World during the course of the trade. I can't overlook that one. I got to repeat that one, y'all. But also because some 1.9 million slaves from the Bight of Benin appear to have landed in the New World during the course of trade. The present study, after a few words on sources and geography concerning, concentrating on the preliminary estimates of the number of slaves shipped from the Bight of Benin, some investigation of their ethnic origin, and the comparison of the slave trade estimates with interpretations given in several historic works. Let's continue. And that's 109. Okay, let's go to 110. And I want to see if this is where I want to stop, or do I want to keep going? I don't want to start right here. Let's go to I don't want to stop right here. Okay, let's go to and this would be 113 place names. The literature on the 17th, 18th, and even 19th century in Dahomey contains much confusion on the names of towns and ethnic groups. This geographical confusion has led in turn to confusion of the political and the economic history of the area. Virtually every author writing on the Bight of Benin has included a section locating the towns, yet in virtually every case, significant errors remain and insignificant attention has been called to the discrepancies among various authorities. My own impression is that there has been great stability in towns and to a lesser degree in the location of ethnic groups. Unquestionably, however, the names given to towns and peoples by Europeans change radically with the passage of time. Rather than accept to unravel the errors of literature step by step, I will present an interpretation of the location of coastal towns in the 17th through the 19th century, going from west to east. Kida, Little Popo, Anicho, and Grand Popo have been identifiable since 1600s. At some point, authors confused Little Popo and Grand Popo. Now, you know what's funny about seeing that word, and I don't know exactly what it means, but I remember back in the day, the popo was considered the police. I wonder by chance if that came from that. Whenever you seen the popo, you say that was the, you seen the police. Anyway, let's continue. At the same points, authors confused Little Popo and Grand Popo or assumed that they had a single king. Grand Popo is often reported to have been an inland or island, but probably it was always the long peninsula it is today, perhaps with a marshy area in the peninsula. Allegations by the 17th century writers that Little Popo, Grand Popo, and Ouidah, Juda, were ruled earlier by Ardra. I could be having that name wrong, or backed by no specifics that may just as well be disbelieved. In the Ouidah as a kingdom, the capital was Savi, 10 kilometers inland, and so too were the European factories from 1600s to 1720s. And actually, the Dahomey people will burn that factory, those factories at Sava, which was fascinating. Ouidah, Juda, Whydah to the English, Glihau to the Juda, these names I could be butchering, was known to the Dutch of the 1650s as Fulan and later Fida. The town, oh boy, this is deep. 4 kilometers from the beach was the site of the forts built 1701. And this is just going over some of this guy was saying the Yoruba name. And I want to, so that's kind of how they were saying it looks. And I don't know how this is going to look on the phone. I'm doing this off this. So, but that's how it looked. And let's go down, and it's going to get a little bit more interesting now. Where do I want to start at? Table 4.1 gives estimate of the number of slaves exported by decade and by exporting nations for the coast from Little Popo through Lagos. It is based on the approach and the estimates of Curtin, but it includes figures revised from or in addition to Curtin's estimate, and includes some guesses that I have concocted in order to fill the tables. So if we go over here, y'all, so Brazil, you got 10,000, and that's 1671 to 1680. You got 17,000 from 1681 to 1690. This stuff still gets you emotional. I'm real talk, man. This still gets you emotional. From 1701 to 1710, you got 86,000 in Brazil. And it's very interesting because with Brazilian, with their such big Afro population, if you will, via the slave trade, somehow it still seems that they're very underrated, man. But a lot of people went to Brazil. English, 22,000 in 1680, 55,000 in 1711. You see the Dutch over there, 9,000, 6,000, 12,000, 12,000. And look at those totals, y'all. You're talking about, 12,000 in 1641 to 1650. You're talking about 17,000 from 1661 to 1670. You're talking about 100,000 from 1661 to 1700. I mean, they were just wiping Judah out. Wiping Judah out. All right. So we see those numbers. Estimated slave exports from the Bight of Benin. All right. Let's continue, y'all. I want to start at a good point. I don't want to read that. Excuse me, y'all. We gotta hit it where it makes sense. All right, let's continue. All right, let's eat. Popo to the English and Dutch. As a matter of fact, I want to start up above. Yeah, let's start up above. Okay, and we will go with that bottom paragraph. Actually, in the middle. Okay. The earliest published estimate of the value of the slave trade from the Bight of Benin is Delby's assertion in 1617. In 1617, no, at 1670, I'm sorry, that 3,000 slaves were sold each year at Afra to the Dutch and English. The implied figures of 30,000 per decade is well above the 17,000 I have estimated, the author is talking, for 1661 and 1670, especially when considered that the LB, excuse me if I'm butchering that name, included only one port and only two of the three slave trading nations. In 1678, the Royal African Company, factored at Afra, reported that 6,000 to 7,000 slaves per year were available there. That would imply up to 70,000 slaves per decade, again, from one port, as opposed to estimate of 32,000 for the whole coast, 1671 to 1680. Shipping records for the Portuguese, the English, and Dutch became much more reliable than previously in the 1680s, and they indicate a total export of some 5,000 slaves per year. Barbot, however, reported based on observations in the 1680s too, that the Dutch bought 3,000 slaves per year at Afra. I wonder, Afra, I need to see what that one means. I've heard a word similar to that. And that Juda could provide another 1,000 slaves per month. It implied a total of at least 15,000 slaves for the whole coast. The figure of 1,000 slaves per month from Ouidah, from Juda, was repeated by two other observers in 1690s, Bosman and Diamond. Ducassi gave fairly comprehensive estimates for the year 1687, 300 per year total from Little Popo and Grand Popo to English and Dutch. 4,000 to 5,000 per year from Afra. Not the Beta Afra, but from Afra to the Dutch. 14 to 15,000 per year from Ouidah. 14 or 15,000 per year from Juda to the English, and 600 to 700 per year from Ouidah to French. So they was passing Ouidah around. They was passing Yehuda around. This estimate means at maximum 21,000 slaves per year, and cannot be supported by shipping evidence. But check this out, y'all. It may be noted that all of the preceding observers have ignored the Portuguese trade, although it was perhaps the largest. I thought that was very fascinating. He's saying those numbers seem interesting, but he's saying at the same time, they ignored the Portuguese trade, although it is although it is perhaps the largest. It is a puzzling omission. Yeah, I bet it was. From the period after 1700s, Bourbon retrieved a document from French archives dividing up the Ouidah trade in 1716 as follows: 5 to 6,000 per year to the French, 6 to 7,000 per year to English, 1,000 to 1,500 per year to the Dutch, and 6,000 to 7,000 per year to the Portuguese. A total of 18 to 21,500, according to table 4.1. However, the trade for the whole coast averaged 15,000 per year in that decade. In Ouidah, Juda was not the only port. Labat gives figures of 16 to 18,000 per year for Ouidah in the period of 1725 and 1776. Let me stop and say this is so fascinating. You know, they have that plaque out in Virginia. I forgot which particular town, but that plaque when it says, "These Israelites and other African Americans That's a very interesting plaque when you see where so many came from. Let's continue. Perhaps a more dependable observer was the slave ship Captain Atkinson. All right, let's check this out. Who estimated that the trade of Ouidah, the trade of Juda, had been about half that of the whole Ghanaian coast for the period roughly from 1710 to 1727, that the figure had hit 20,000 exports in certain years, and that 40 to 50 ships per year visited the port. Wow. So if you're talking 40 to 50 ships, I would say for the year, that's about 5 ships a year. You know, let's continue. Akin Joe Jogbin has noted several fragmentary estimates of the slave trade. He cites a 1744 statement that Little Popo, Kipi, and Badagry each exported more slaves than Ouidah. For 1750, he cites a statement that 9,000 slaves were sold annually at Juda, 4,000 to the Portuguese, and 5,000 to the French. Patterson has cited a French document showing 10,900 exports from the whole coast in 1765. 5,000 from Ouidah, 5,000 from Juda. Norris gives a figure of 5,000 to 6,000 slaves per year from Ouidah in 1776. Laberty gives figures of 10,150 slaves from Ouidah in 1776, and a decrease to 3,605 slaves from Ouidah in 1787. And Dunning gives estimates for 1787 for the whole coast: 100 from Grand Popo, 4,500 from Ouidah, 3,500 from Port Novo and Badagry, and 3,500 from Lagos and Benin, for a total of 11,000 each. All right, let's see. Do I want to continue on here? Okay, let's see what he's saying. Okay. All in all, and let's start in the middle. We start in the middle, y'all. All in all, the markers of isolated estimates on the African coast, especially in the early years, overstated the value of the slave trade. As Curtin has suggested, they tended to see a normal year as one in which the trade was at a high level. They also confused the actual volume of trade with the volume of trade they thought attainable, or as it seems to be in the case of Dekasi in 1687, they would exaggerate the trade of other nations in order to get more support for the trade from within their own nation. Information on the relative contribution of various ports to the slave trade is of great interest to historians. Unfortunately, it is hard to come by, especially since the most systematic estimates of the volume of the trade comes from New World shipping and import data. Nevertheless, some estimates of the volume of trade by port have survived, and it is possible to fill them out to a degree with quantitative impressions from the literature. By 1650, the Dutch and the Portuguese knew and visited ports of Quito, Little Popo, Grand Popo, Ouidah, Jaquin, and El Equipe. Excuse me if I'm butchering that, y'all. The Portuguese gained passports from the Dutch of Amina to visit Grand Popo, Ouidah, Jaquin, and Equipe. And Jaquin, if I'm saying that right, was apparently the most significant slave port. I haven't even heard of that name. Wow. English merchants had come to Jaquin and Afra by 1670s, and French merchants followed them to the coast during the 1680s. Ouidah surpassed Jaquin as the principal slave port on the coast Hey, Juda, let's go back in and do that again. During the 1680s, Juda surpassed Jaquin as the principal slave port of the coast, whereas writers in the 1670s and before had given most of their attention to the kingdom of Ouidah. Writers in the 1680s have to give more attention to Whydah kingdom. Slave trade continued. Meanwhile, Grand Popo and Akapi, or whatever how you say that, it has been poorly recorded, partly because there was a smaller volume and because the weaker political authorities there did not merit much diplomatic attention. All right, let's continue a little bit longer. From 1690s through 1720s, Ouidah continued to be the principal port. So when you study the maps and it say Juda, and you know it slash Ouidah, yeah, that continued to be the principal port. And Jakin presumably was in the second place, perhaps a distant second, with the Bohemian conquest of Ardra in 1725. The town and the factories of Afra were destroyed. This is what I was talking about earlier. The homie traded in slaves through Jakin, which it did not at first rule directly. In 1727, the homie conquered the Juda kingdom. I want to say that's all Ouidah and Juda, all the words are tied together. I'm gonna double check in a little bit, but I want to say this for sure. And destroyed the towns and factories of Savi. The slave trade henceforth was organized around the European forts at Juda or Ouidah. In 1732 to 1735, the homie conquered Jakin and destroyed the Dutch and other factories. Their trade at Jakin then ceased, and virtually all trade of the homie went through Ouidah through Juda. I mean, so this thing, we you know, the people, they all through this. You know what I'm saying? When you look at them names. Now this was saying that they complained, the slave traders complained because of the decline of the slave trade following the Dominion, Dahomey conquest. It's like though it wasn't a sharp decline. And that's talking through the 1730s and 40s. New ports began. Apparently I'm browsing through this real quick, y'all. The Brazilian and Dutch merchants. So that was pretty interesting. And so we go over here and we got another table, slave trade in the Bight of Benin is what it's titled, 1640 to 1890. So you got Ouidah, Juda, you got at 46%. So that's the French estimate. The Brazilian trade 39%, you got 8,000 plus. And then the British, you got 4,500. Then you got second would be Grand Popo, and then you got Port Novo. And that's that. Do I want to continue? Let's see with this. From reading that last paragraph from the 1790s, all but the trade to Brazil seems to have fallen sharply. The French ceased slave trading in 1794 with the revolution. Napoleon reinstated the slave trade in 1804, but this does not seem to have led to significant French slave trading on the coast of Dahomey. The English trade definitely ended in 1801, but had been a low ebb for years previously. Brazilian traders, however, maintained their trading posts all along the coast. And it's my opinion that well, I'm not gonna give my opinion. Let's keep going. Under the terms of special agreement, Portuguese continued to trade legally in slaves at Ouidah. So they still still doing slave trades at Juda until the 1815. Elsewhere after 1808, everywhere after 1850, the legal and clandestine trade began. And the slaves had to move rapidly to chosen points on the coast and loaded before the slave cadre could seize ships. In this period, the slave trade was dominated by great Brazilian merchants, notably Francisco Felix de Souza. Now, if you've been researching, you know that name de Souza pops out a little bit, right? I want to say sound like a Portuguese, but and later Domingo Martins. They set up factories at various points on the coast of what's that, Agis, I don't even know, to Lagos, and succeeded in exporting large numbers of slaves from the coast as long as there was a demand. Additionally, slaves were purchased by Spanish and American ships in this period. A number of Spanish had settled on the coast, but no Americans are known to have done so. Few details are known of this trade, but it appears from contemporary accounts to have been quite significant. In 1851, the slave trade was abolished in Brazil. In the same year, the British established effective control of Lagos. The result was to cut off the main source of demand and one major outlet for the supply on the coast. Trade continued to Brazil and Cuba, but on a sporadic basis. The real end to the slave trade in the Bight of Benin came in 1862 to 1863 with the abolition of the slavery in Brazil and the clear turning of the American Civil War. After that, nevertheless, a few slaves continued to be sold on the coast of Dahomey. The French protectorate of Porto Novo in 1860, and the British westward movements from Lagos cut off all ports from Ouidah and Grand Popo. Such slaves as were exported from 1880 seem to have gone to other African colonies such as San Tome. And of course, that pops up in a lot of research. And Cameroon. That's interesting if they spell Cameroon like that. Wow. And particularly sale of slaves by Dahomey to Germans have been documented from the years 1889 to 1992. Let's see. I'm probably gonna get ready to end it with this, but yeah, man, just shows you the history and the numbers. You're talking about in the thousands, and some say in the millions. Do your research, man. I'll praise the Most High. Peace.